Oh, a few months ago, while I was researching for a video, I stumbled across some scrap of old text that mentioned sticker expansions. Basically, there was a bootleg expansion set that Wizards of the Coast didn't condone that came as stickers, and you would just stick them to actual Magic cards, and then you would add these cards to your deck. I thought it would be cool to dig up what I could find about this set, and dudes, I found scans of the entire set. We're going to talk about what the hell this set even is, how it came to be, the steps that Mr. Ditzler took to avoid copyright, and then we'll just go over all 75 cards in this set. Some of the cards we'll talk about in some detail, but mostly it'll just be a brief exhibition of the forgotten bootleg set. Middle Ages. Yeah. There is little documentation on this bootleg set, but there is a fandom page. This page had one source, which is an article from Magic Untapped that I could only view through the Wayback Machine. But it also had a reference link to Magic Librarities, where I found some additional information, as well as the scans to every card in the set. I couldn't find any way to verify some of this information, so take it with a grain of salt, but I do have no reason to not trust this information. These stickers were created by Fred Ditzler, who was apparently a university student in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Ditzler did all of the artwork for these 75 cards, and as far as I know, designed them all as well. However, 3 weeks after the regional release of these cards in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware, Wizards of the Coast found out about it and slapped a cease and desist order on Middle Ages for references to their game and system. That's a super classy move from Wizards of the Coast, considering they had just gotten out of legal trouble themselves. They were sued by Palladium Books for making Primal Order, which is a role-playing game supplement meant to, well, supplement other gaming systems, like Dungeons and Dragons and Palladium. Joking aside, though, they definitely did have to do something about this. You can't just have anybody making magic sets for various reasons we won't really get into. But anyways, Fred Ditzler capitulated with the cease and desist order and destroyed the unsold cards, and Middle Ages was dead before it had the chance to become too popular. But it was, however, popular enough to be mentioned in Scry magazine issue number 5. I don't know if there's anything else about these cards in Scry magazine, because I didn't want to spend $10 on the issue to find out, but this little blurb here is from the magazine as far as I know. Middle Ages is the brainchild of Fred Ditzler of Millersburg College. This 73 sticker set is intended to be attached to a land or other common card, thus producing a new card set. Presentation is excellent, and the concepts are very interesting. However, be cautioned that, at the present, it is unauthorized by Wizards of the Coast. So, it's pretty likely that Scry didn't want to risk pissing off Wizards by featuring it heavily, even if they did think it was worth covering. And you may also notice that they said 73 cards, and not 75 cards, which is what I said. That's because Ditzler came up with the concept of ungodly rares. These ungodly rares were Wasp of the Hive and Ruck, which were the first ever tokens produced for the Hive and Ruck Egg, respectively. In order to obtain one of these tokens, you had to send in 5 Middle Ages booster wrappings and 4 American dollars to Marauder Graphics, and they'd send you the token of your choice. That's just absolutely hilarious to me. It honestly makes the whole thing seem like a fucking scam, but, whatever. Each booster pack had 8 stickers in it, and it sold for $2.50. Let's look at some of these cards so that we can understand what changes Ditzler made to try and skirt copyright laws. This is Tiberius, a legendary dragon, and this card is hard to look at. The first technique Ditzler used was to avoid any of Wizard's intellectual property, which, good idea. So the mana symbols are all different. I picked this card because it shows all of them off. We have black as the tombstone, followed by blue as a wave, followed by white as some Christian imagery for some reason. Then we have green as a palm tree, I think. And finally red mana. That's just fire. Next to the mana symbols, you'll notice that the power and toughness have been moved to a really awkward part of the card. But anyways, this card is an 8/8. And if you haven't perused the whole card yet, you might be wondering how I know this card is named Tiberius, since it just says Elder Dragon, right there where the name would usually go. That's because Ditzler also swapped the type line with the name line, putting the name where the type would go and putting the type where the name would go. And we'll talk about this card more later in detail and whether it's good and stuff like that, but let's look at another card quick to see some more of the changes. Underlings is a 1/1 summon demon that costs 1 and 2 black mana. You can turn it to do 1 point of damage to any target. So he also avoided using terms like tap and untap. That does seem like a smart idea, but he did use Norin the Wary on the flavor text of like 4 different cards, which seems like a really interesting choice to me when you're going out of your way to avoid copyright infringement. But what do I know? And to be fair, Ditzler did use a bunch of Wizards of the Coast intellectual property, because he included 2 documentation pages in each pack that explain things pretty well. There's a page that explains in pretty good detail on how to apply a sticker, which might sound stupid, but putting stickers on stuff flawlessly is pretty unforgiving and more difficult than you'd reasonably assume if you've never done it. There's also a nice warning to children to have their parents help, which that's cool to see. The second documentation card, however, contains some rules text where it explains what turn and unturn even mean. Most of the mechanics from this page that get explained are from Legends, which makes sense because this set borrows heavily from Legends. Then the document explains what each mana symbol means, and you wouldn't believe this, but I got them all right without even looking at this. So I'm pretty proud of myself for that. But anyways, this document lists off all the stuff they stole from Wizards of the Coast, and after a section thanking those that helped, is the bit explaining where you would send the money in the 5 booster packs to, so that you could get a Ruck or a Wasp of the Hive. What a deal. This whole situation is really funny to me. Like, it's just a guy that managed to actually make some Magic cards and got pretty far in distributing them before he got shut down by the Wizards. I can't even decide if I think he did a wrong thing or not. I mean, without more details than I was able to find, it's just more of a curiosity than anything else, I suppose. But hot damn, are these cards a shiny curiosity. So, let's talk about the cards then, shall we? As I've said, it's a 75 card set, and there are 9 white cards, 9 blue cards, 10 black cards, 10 red cards, and 9 green cards. It also has 9 artifacts, 5 of those are artifact creatures, but one of those is the Wasp token that we already mentioned. There are 5 lands in this set, a few of which are legendary, and 5 multicolored cards in this set. If you're doing the math in your head, that does leave us with 9 more cards. And these cards are colorless cards. There are 9 colorless cards that are not artifacts in this set. All of these cards are creatures except for Redirection, which is the only colorless interrupt I have ever seen. This is a crazy set of cards, and these were really fun and super confusing to go through, so let's talk about them all. Oh yeah, one more thing to keep in mind. What I show you on screen is not exactly how these cards would have looked. The resolution I got them at was not best, which is completely understandable. I mean, it's scans of a niche product from the 90s. But to make them a little less blurry and increase the readability, I did go through the process of applying sharpening and occasionally some noise reduction, as well as a bit of saturation adjustment if that was necessary. So these are the cards as they were, but they have been changed just ever so slightly. And like stuff like the set symbol and the font got a little bit fudged up in the process. As we go through these cards, I'll be going through them in the usual Wooberg order, and there will be timestamps to help you jump around if that's something you would like to do. So, without further ado, Let's check out the bootleg cards of the Middle Ages. The first white card we have to talk about is Eternal Battlefield, an enchant world that costs 4 generic and 2 white mana. All damage done to creatures is reduced to 0. White must be paid during upkeep or Eternal Battlefield is destroyed. This is a wild card to start with, and this is also the first world enchantment that I've ever talked about, so that's fun. World enchantments are a retired super type that is meant to act as like a balancing valve. Basically, there can only be one world enchantment on the field at a time, and if a new one comes into play, then the last world enchantment is removed from play. With that in mind, this is kind of a sweet card. I don't think it's necessarily that good, but it's pretty awesome in a go wide style deck. If you can keep more creatures on the board than they can, you can pretty much swing in for free, because blocking your 1/1s doesn't do all that much, and your risk of getting blown out with attrition goes down significantly. It's nice that they added an upkeep cost to this, but this is still the type of card that some decks just can't beat. Yeah, I don't know how to feel about this one. On the one hand, I think it does actually add some interesting gameplay. But it's also not that different than like a stasis or something, where some decks are just going to struggle so hard against this. It's interesting though, so I do like that about it. And the art is pretty sweet. But next up is Antidote of Columbra, or whatever. It's a sorcery that costs 2 and a white. It simply says, target player may remove up to 3 poison counters. Huh, so this is sort of like leeches, which didn't come out until Homelands. Apparently, even right after poison counters were introduced in Legends, some players really wanted a way out of it. This is a pretty cool card. It's not a good card by any means, but I could see this having a place in some play groups. The art is pretty solid as well. Then we have Church, which is an enchant land that costs a single white mana and is just white wild growth. Not to spoil my own video, but there's actually a cycle of wild growth in this set. I really don't know how to feel about this. I'll talk about this more as we get to the other colored wild growths, but I do think the white one offends my sensibilities the most. Yeah, I'm trying to find a way to justify how white could do this, but I'm just drawing a blank. It's a great card, but it's not a white card, unfortunately. Crossbowman is a 1/1 summon soldier that costs 2 and a white, and you can turn it. That's going to get confusing. Anyway, you can tap Crossbowmen to deal 2 damage to any attacking or blocking creature. So this is just a strictly different Davenant Archer. It's the same mana cost. Davenant Archer deals 1 damage, but it gets an extra toughness for the trouble. In most situations, I think this is much better, but I also don't necessarily think it's that great. It is probably one of the better creature destroyers that's limited to attacking or blocking creatures, though, so there is that. I also can't decide if this helps open up attacking as an option more, or if it slogs combat down more than it already is. It's hard to say without playing with it, but this card doesn't really offend my sensibilities. The art is stupid, but that kind of endears me to the card even more. Then we have Dragon Slayer, a 3/3 summon slayer for 3 and 2 white mana. You can pay 3 white mana and tap Dragon Slayer to destroy a target dragon, worm, drake, or dragon engine. My boy Dragon Engine out here pissing someone off. Dragon Engine is a machine. I'm pretty sure the killing techniques wouldn't be the same as they would be for like a real dragon, but whatever. I think this card is pretty cool. It's pretty fairly costed, and the effect is interesting. Sort of like King Suleiman, and I really enjoy that card because Djinns were fairly common because they were so good, but not really common enough for King Suleiman to be more than just a sideboard card. This card has a wider net, but it's still a fairly niche effect. Yeah, I like this card. The art is awesome too. Not much to say about this next card. It's Fighter, a 1/1 summon soldier that costs 1 white mana and has protection from black. It's good against black, but still probably worse than the other white 1/1s that already exist. The art is fine as well, but that sword is pretty whack. Either way, moving on to Manifest Destiny. Feel like I'm in school again. So, Manifest Destiny is an enchant land that costs 2 and 2 white mana. You gain control of target land until enchantment or target land is destroyed. This does not tap or untap the target land when cast. This is a funny concept for a card, but it does feel like a white card. Otherwise, it's just control magic for a land. Probably less good than control magic is, because control magic can help you win the game. Uh, but there are some pretty strong lands, so there are situations where this would be sweet. Probably not worth seriously playing, though. Either way, up next is Paladin of the Great Griffin, a 3/3 summon paladin that costs 2 and 2 white mana. Paladin has first strike and protection from black, so this is just a strictly bigger white knight that costs 2 extra mana. It's probably fine, but it's not overcosted. The art is cool, though. But that brings us to our last white card, PayPal Blessing, an instant that costs 1 and 2 white mana. When you cast PayPal Blessing, all white creatures gain protection from black until end of turn. This is pretty niche, but not a shocking ability for white to have. Seems reasonably costed for the time. There are similar things to this ability that also cost 3, if I'm remembering correctly. But yeah, it's a cool name for a card, and it's pretty flavorful, but it also does kind of suck. I like it, but let's move on to the blue cards. First up, we have Aquarius, an enchant world that costs 3 blue mana. All spells that have an X component must now pay 3x instead. In example, a 2-point Stream of Life would cost 1 green and 6 colorless. This is really funny to me. Feels like someone really thought X spells needed a nerf, which I guess is fair enough considering the card pool, but man, this is funny as hell. I really like the art, but this card sucks. Anyways, next up is a Merfolk. Atlantean Cavalry costs 1 and 2 blue mana for a 3/3 with trample, and Atlantean Cavalry can only attack if the opponent has islands in play. This is pretty cool. There wasn't much for Merfolk at the time, since it's only Lord of Atlantis and Merfolk of the Pearl Trident. So this seems like it's just trying to fill a gap. The card is okay as well. A 3/3 Trampler for 3 with a downside is a pretty fair rate for the time. The art is also fine, I guess. I don't really feel either way about this art. So let's move on to Calm, an enchantment that costs 1 and 3 blue mana. All land destruction spells are instantly countered. Somebody didn't like Stone Rain or Armageddon. Or maybe it was Sinkhole and Ice Storm that brought them over the edge. Who's to say, but I guess this is a better solution to land destruction than pyramids, but it still comes down after a Stone Rain, so. And it's also worth noting that Strip Mine gets around this, as it's not a spell. I wonder if Ditzler knew that. Anyways, the art is really cool for this, and the card is fine. Certainly not powerful enough to warp anything, and it's a novel effect if it works properly within the rules. So let's move on to Huber's Hypnotic Gaze, which is a really interesting card. It's 2 blue mana for an interrupt, and after attackers have been declared, defenders may choose one of the attackers to untap and block one of his comrades. At the end of combat, control reverts back to original owner. Oh, and look, a typo on control. So basically, you cast this and you gain control of a creature, you untap it, and you remove it from combat, and then block another attacking creature with it. I like this. It's a fun bit of control magic that's pretty reasonably costed. It's niche, and casuals would probably hate playing against this, but it's definitely interesting. The art is messed up as hell, though. This is a creepy dude. The next card is pretty simple, but does kind of throw a wrench into the rules without really addressing it. Mana Tax is an enchantment that costs 2 and a blue. All spells cast are countered unless an additional mana is spent. The additional mana is of the same color as the spell. An example, Banalish Hero now costs 2 white mana. Oh hey, I think he intentionally misspelt Banalish Hero to have some plausible deniability. It's funny as hell. Or maybe he just misspelled it, who's to say? I didn't notice that earlier. Alright, so this is a pretty simple stacks piece. It just increases the casting cost of each spell by one of whatever color that spell is. But this does bring up two hiccups, even just from cards that exist in this set. First off, what about multicolored cards? Does Tiberius now cost an extra 5, or do I pick a color? No idea, because it doesn't mention that. Fred Ditzler also added colorless spells to this set. There are like 8 non-artifact creatures, and a few artifact creatures as well. Plus, artifacts on their own are a spell until cast. So what about these? Colorless is not a color. Obviously, it would just cost a colorless, but this is still ambiguous as hell. I also genuinely don't know what the intent was for multicolored spells. I could see an argument that the designer wanted to punish multicolor, which would be an odd choice because most of the multicolored cards sucked at this point, but you could make that argument and they would cost an extra color for each color of the spell. But again, I just don't know. It's more likely that it's the other one and you just pick a color, but again, it doesn't say. Power level wise, I think this card is fine, but I wouldn't vote for it for being fun to play with or against. Next, we have Meandering River, and no, not the Tapland from Oath of the Gatewatch. It's Blue Wild Growth from Middle Ages. So this is an enchant land that costs a blue, and the enchanted land provides an extra blue mana when tapped. I still don't think I like this card. It's very good, but I can't really think of blue generating extra mana. There are some instances of it a bit later down the line, but like only cards I can think of in blue that exist in Legends and before is Mana Drain, which doesn't really count as mana generation, and Reset, which lets you untap all your lands. This just seems too out of color for my taste. Funnily enough, if it was an artifact that tapped for blue, I'd have no issue with it. Funny how that works. I do really like the card name in the art, though. I think it's a fantastic card from that perspective. Up next is Musical Chairs, and holy shit, this shit would not fly today. Musical Chairs is a sorcery that costs 2 and 4 blue. Caster and target player switch seats, or all players move one seat to the left or right. Cards and life totals remain where they are. So, this is hilarious, but just off the top of my head, this is a logistical nightmare of epic proportions. Cards remain where they are? Does that mean everyone takes their hand with them, or that the hand remains with the deck that it came from? What if one person is holding their cards and the other one has their hand on the table? Does that guy just get fucked? Who chooses if they move left or right? Is this exchange permanent? Like, anti-style permanent? Anti was pretty much a standard rule at this point, except in tournaments. Not everyone played for anti, but some people did, and design decisions were based around that. What if someone is in a wheelchair? This card is ridiculous. This is drunk party game style of mechanics, and I, for one, am aghast. It's probably a funny as fuck card in the right circumstances, but there are so many different ways something like this could potentially go sour. I wouldn't be confident designing a card like this that has so much potential of ruining someone's night. What a stupid card. This is some, like, Sharpie format meets unset level dorkery. The art is fine. It's just some chairs with a nice watercolor background. But I guess let's move on. Oh boy. Alright, up next is schizophrenia, which is not really a subject to take lightly, so the fact that I'm talking about a card named Schizophrenia immediately after musical chairs is pretty wild. Granted, this was the 90s and you'd often hear stuff like schizo as an insult, so I guess it's not a huge stretch to see it here. Anyway, Schizophrenia is an enchant creature that costs 1 and a blue. During upkeep, creature's owner must flip a coin. If it comes up in his favor, creature remains. If it does not, it goes to his opponent with the most life. So that's sort of a fun mechanic, I guess. Coin flips are more of a red thing than a blue thing at this point, so if you must make this card, I think I'd rather it was red. I'd also prefer more clarified rules text, because I don't know if this happens at every upkeep, or just the upkeep of the owner of the enchanted creature, or the controller of the enchanted creature. It also says owner. So if you take this card at its word, you enchant their, I don't know, Llanowar elves, I guess. They flip a coin at their upkeep and lose the flip. So their opponent with the most life gets control of the creature. But the owner of the card does not change. Unless it does, I guess, but that would be crazy because the card says nothing about ante. This means that the owner would still trigger the flip and do the flip, not the controller of the creature. But the owner doesn't actually have any chance to get the creature back, because if the coin flip comes up in his favor, it remains under his opponent's control. If he loses the flip, the creature goes to his opponent with the most life. In a 1v1, that will always be the opponent with the creature. In a multiplayer game, there's some chance that someone else would get the creature, but it will never go back to the person who lost the card. I can't tell if that's how it's intended for this to work and this card is supposed to be a rules lawyer's wet dream, or if the card was intended to work how you would naturally assume. At upkeep, the controller flips a coin, and if they win, they keep the creature. If they lose, it goes to the opponent with the highest life. It's hard to say, but man, this is a stupid card. And I guess potentially a fun one to play with. You know, if it works the way it should and not the way it says it does. I also don't really like the name. I think that's too serious to be making cards about, but I guess whatever. The art is okay. Let's just move on. Up next is Stormfront, an enchantment that costs 2 and a blue. During your upkeep, all flying creatures take 1 point of damage. If no flyers are in play, Stormfront is removed. Okay, so my more modern-brained viewers might scream that this is way out of the color pie, but blue actually did have some access to damage around this time. Psionic Blast and Prodigal Sorcerer come to mind the most heavily, but Volcanic Eruption also exists at this time. So by the standards of the time, and in a world with a more loosely designed color pie, I don't really hate this effect. I don't really understand the flavor of it though. Storms don't just, leave after they kill all the birds in front of them. But I guess it's not worth thinking about. Balance-wise, this is fine. It's not really solving any problems that don't already have solutions, and it also hits blue itself pretty hard since blue has a lot of flyers. But yeah, it's kind of just a boring card to talk about after the last couple. I do like the art though, it's very cool. But that's the last of the blue cards in Middle Ages, so let's talk about the black cards. And we're starting off with Anti-Paladin, a 3/3 summon paladin that costs 2 and 2 black mana. And you guessed it, it has first strike and protection from white. We talked about this with White Knight and Griffin Paladin, so we won't dally on this, but the art is cool, and it's still a decent concept. Burial Ground is the Black Wild Growth, and this one doesn't bother me too much. Black had access to generating mana since the beginning, and while it was already mostly transitioned into sacrificing things for mana with stuff like Sacrifice and Yawgmoth's Priest, this isn't too far of a stretch for me. Like the other wild growths, it's a really good card, and the art is pretty cool too. Up next is Flaming Zombies of Pothos, a 1/1 summon zombie that costs a single black mana and you can tap it for a red mana. Busted. This is straight busted. The mana generation line is starting to get pushed for me. I'm fine with this existing, but it really should cost 2 or maybe even 3. This is before Flame Sisters, or Sisters of the Flame, or whatever it's called, was released. And even that is kind of pushing the pie, but this shouldn't be as efficient as Llanowar Elves. I'd play it, though. Also, the art is pretty sweet, but I don't really get why the zombies have axes. Either way. Next up is Frederick's Festering Wound, an enchant creature that costs 2 black mana. Enchanted creature gains a -0/-1 counter for each point of damage received. It dies when it would normally die. Not sure why they had to write that line, but sure. And counters remain even if enchantment is removed. So this is sort of interesting. It basically just says damage is permanent on enchanted creature, but in a way that actually works in the rules. It also makes each damage 2 damage for the turn it's damaged, because if you hit something with 1 damage, it would immediately get the counter, but the damage doesn't go away until cleanup, so that's also pretty interesting. I'm not sure if it was intended that way or not, but it's interesting. The art is also surprisingly detailed. I wonder if this is a Photoshop and he just sharpened the hell out of it and upped the saturation, then added some brush strokes to make the background and such. But if he drew this by hand, it's really impressive. This card is pretty cool. I don't think it's too strong, and the flavor is good. I like this one. Up next is Necromancer, who is a 2/3 summon Necromancer that costs 1 and 2 black. You can tap Necromancer to regenerate a skeleton, zombie, or wall of bone. Then you can pay 2 mana to give all skeletons, zombies, and walls of bone +1/+1 until end of turn. It's pretty funny to call out Wall of Bone like that. This card is pretty obviously designed as a key piece to Undead Tribal, I guess. It's meant as a build around, and since it's taking cards that kinda suck and don't really have an aggro-based game plan, I'm not really sure how good this is. My gut instinct says in the right build it's a little undercosted, but if people are playing with like the good cards, then this kinda just sucks. So I'm not really sure what to say. It's got a lot going for it as a creature at this point, but I don't know, it's probably fine. The art is fun though. The skeletons just kind of look like they're having a party behind him, which I think is funny. Speaking of build-arounds, up next is Pied Piper, a 2/2 summon Piper that costs 2 and a black. Bet you can't guess where this is going. That's right. While Piper's in play, all rats gain bands with other rats. So that's really fucking funny. Except I think now there's a reasonable expectation on me to explain what the hell bands with others means and how it works, which kind of requires me to explain banding. Man, fuck this Piper. I guess let's talk about banding. When you are declaring attackers, you can band together creatures that have bands and up to one creature that doesn't. If the band of attackers is blocked, you distribute the damage you receive instead of your opponent. Also, if a creature can block one of the creatures with banding, or within the band, then it can block the band. That means that if you band together a flying creature with a non-flying creature, the band could be blocked by any creature that can block a creature. It can also be blocked by creatures that can only block flying creatures. Or if a creature in the band had trample and a card existed that said this card can only block creatures with trample, then that creature would be able to block the band. Does that make sense? No, I didn't think so. But let's move on. While you're declaring blockers, you can band together creatures you have with banding and any number of other creatures. So, as long as you have one creature with banding, all creatures can join together. When the band blocks a creature, you distribute the damage you receive instead of your opponent. For a while, this meant that you could distribute all the damage you receive from a creature with trample, so a Banalish hero could eat all the damage from a creature with trample. They did eventually change that though. But that's probably all you need to understand about banding for us to move on to bands with others, because the rest is pretty corner case. So let's talk about bands with others. In the 2010 rules change, bands with others changed. So let's talk about how bands with others worked before they fixed it, because that would have been the context around this card being designed. Bands with others, or in this case, bands with other rats, allows a card on it to band with other cards that have bands with other rats on it. This means for 2 cards to band using this ability, they must both have bands with other thing. Pied Piper actually makes this mechanic work as intended by giving all rats bands with other rats, then every rat you have can band together with every other rat that you have. So that's pretty cool. I wonder if he designed this knowing that bands with others really sucked, or if this was just a logical design space for an idea that he wanted to explore. Oh yeah, and bands with other thing now lets you band with things that have bands with other thing, and cards that are the other thing itself. It's more intuitive, but I bet half of you are still just as confused by what the fuck banding even does. Doesn't hurt that I can't explain in a nuanced way, but even if I could, this shit is just straight confusing. I do kind of enjoy banding, though. It is a fun nerd moment to have an understanding of something because you wasted your life obsessing over stupid shit that doesn't matter. It was definitely smart of them to stop using it, but it is pretty cool. Yeah, well, that was a lot of explaining to tell you why this card is hilarious to me. Funnily enough, it's actually pretty good. You have to build around it, obviously, but it's great in a rat deck. Shadow Drake is next, and this is a more simple card. For 2 and 3 black mana, you get a 3/3 summon Drake with flying that can't be blocked, and when it blocks, the attacker deals no damage. That's pretty good. This is a card that would be hard to deal with if your collection was the average collection in 1994, and it's pretty on rate for what it does. It's not as interesting as a rat with banding, and honestly, this feels like it should be a white card to me, but I kind of just don't have strong opinions on this card. I do really like the art though, but let's just move on. Underling is a 1/1 for 1 and 2 black mana that you can tap to deal a damage to any target, and it has Regenerate. So this is interesting because it's basically just Prodigal Sorcerer, except it can regenerate for a black mana. This seems almost too good, and I'm not sure if this is a good thing for black to be doing. I really don't know how I feel about this one, but I do think it would be a good card. I guess Artifact Possession sorta does something similar, and Abyssal Hunter would ping creatures, but Hunter doesn't come out until Mirage, so it couldn't have factored into the design of this card. Yeah, I don't know how to feel about this one. Man, these cards are weird. They sort of sit in an uncanny valley for me, and maybe for you as well. Let me know what you think of these cards, because I think they're crazy. But moving on, the next card was also designed to solve a perceived problem, because we're back on poison counters. Untried Antidote is a sorcery that costs X and a black. You flip a coin, and if you win the flip, remove X poison counters. Otherwise, you lose X life. So this is a neat card, because if you're losing to poison counters, you likely have life points to spare. Otherwise, you'd be more worried about the life points, probably. So while this feels like a very win-lose kind of card, it also feels like the lose isn't that bad comparably, and the win is really good. So that's kind of neat. I think this is a really elegant design space. I don't think it's a good card because, that's just how I feel about poison counters. Maybe solid as a sideboard card in control, but most of their decks should just aim to win before the poison counters become a problem, I think. Or, just remove the poison creatures before they hit you too much. Still, it's a cool card that would, help people out back in the day that disliked poison counters. And again, the game was way different back then. Everyone just had a pile of cards. It's, a lot harder to say, yeah, it dies to Doomblade when nobody's even has a Doomblade, It's a different game. I also don't hate this being in black, but I do think that probably hybrid Rakdos mana would be more suitable to this these days, but maybe not. Black is maybe fine. The last black card I have to show you is Wolf in Sheep's Clothing, which is a 2/2 wolf that costs 2 and has protection from green. So, yeah, this is pretty cool. It's like a slightly worse Black Knight for the other enemy colors. And the flavor is pretty on point too. This is a pretty cool card. It's nice to end the black cards on a card that's pretty simple and easy to think about, but still pretty sweet. But let's talk about the red cards. Okay, now we're starting to offend my sensibilities when it comes to the color pie, which is honestly kind of shocking because I'm pretty lax on this stuff. But anyways, Cauldron of Blood here is an enchantment that costs 2 red mana, and while this is in play, whenever anyone attacks with one or more creatures, you gain 1 life. Okay, so this feels like this card should be black, or arguably green, or its flavor changed and made into a white card. But this doesn't feel like a red card to me. I also think it might be deceptively good, at least for what the game state was back then. You gain 1 life for each attack. That's potentially 2 life a turn cycle, which, isn't much, but it certainly could be enough. It's not like, wow, this is insane, but I do think it's incremental value that's pretty cheap. But like, you just set it and forget it. You don't have to manage this at all. It's just upticks on its own, which could be good. But let's move on. Dwarven General is a 2/2 summon lord that costs 1 and 2 red mana. All dwarves gain +1/+1 and Mountain Walk. So this is fine and pretty cool. It's just a reskinned Goblin King, and that's kind of all it needs to be. Just giving some dwarven support, which is pretty cool. I like this one. But up next is a really interesting card, but not really an exciting card. Dwarven Steam Cannon is a 1/3 summon dwarves that cost 1 and 2 red mana. You can pay 2 red mana to give Dwarven Steam Cannon +2/+0 if it's untapped. Now, based on the art and the flavor text, I think you're only meant to use this in defense, but I don't see what's stopping you on the card from just activating this in the main phase before attacking. Because, you'd be untapped if you weren't declaring attackers. So that's pretty funny. Still kind of a cool card, though, and I do like the art. But up next is Heat Wave, which is a really good card. For 1 and a red, all creatures are 0, -1 until end of turn. Now, the way that that's worded, it sounds like a replacement effect, and that all creatures have their stats turned to 0, -1, which of course would kill them all as a state-based action. I don't think that was the intention of this card, but it's hard to say. Assuming this just gave creatures -1, that's still really good. I'm pretty sure this gets around protection because you're not dealing damage or targeting, but it definitely gets past indestructible. But I don't think that existed yet. No, it didn't. There was no indestructible by Legends. Okay, I looked it up. Technically, concentrated land has indestructible of sorts, but that's not really a creature, so it's not relevant. And Guardian Beast also grants indestructible, but again, to non-creatures, so once again, not relevant. But even without the indestructible cost, this is still really good. Red has a few different ways to damage every creature for 2 mana, so this is fairly on rate. But none of those existed yet, other than, I guess, technically Earthquake, which can be this rate, but can be different rates. I don't like how this is worded, though. It should definitely deal damage, in my opinion. I also don't like that this is technically just 2 mana to kill every creature if you play the card as written, rather than as intended. But it is pretty funny. Up next is Lava Flow, and this is an enchant land that costs a red, and the enchanted land provides an additional red mana when tapped. So again, we're back to the wild growth cycle that I mentioned on all the other colors. This is my favorite. The white one and the blue ones bother me a decent amount. The black one pokes at my sensibilities a bit, but I'm fine with it. And this one doesn't really bother me at all. Red had a few ways of making more mana from their lands since the beginning with Mana Flare, and this, in many ways, just kind of feels like an extension of that flavor. I do struggle with this cycle, though, as it's definitely a green effect, but some of the colors do have some pretty adjacent effects that would allow them to do this, kind of. I think they should probably cost more, but it is what it is. Also, I'm not sure if I've said this, it's probably been obvious by context, but when I'm judging these cards, I'm judging them based on the color pie as it was then. Like, I'm not looking at how the game is designed now, because that would just be unfair to the person who designed these cards. All they had to go off of was everything up until Legends, so I'm only considering cards up until Legends when I look at these cards. But I guess let's just move on. This cycle perplexes me. Overlord is an enchant creature that costs 1 and 2 red mana. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for every non-wall creature in play on your side. If a creature goes to the graveyard, target creature immediately loses the bonus. Also, there is reminder text reminding you that the card should in fact say every other non-wall creature in play, because it doesn't count the creature itself that's enchanted. I don't know why they didn't just put other in the card instead of adding all that extra useless text, but yeah, here we are. This is just the text from Keldon Warlord, except it excludes the creature, whereas Keldon counts itself. Yeah, at the time, this was a really red effect. You know, it's taken from Keldon Warlord, which is one of the first red creatures. Pumping is still sort of red. I guess it's not as common. Maybe kinda. I don't know. This is a sweet card, though. I like it. Yeah, but I guess I don't really have much else to say about it. Primeval Dawn is an enchant world that costs 2 and 2 red mana. All heroes, knights, and paladins gain +1/+1. All lords gain +2/+2. So this is interesting. At this point, I can't think of any white lords where most of the heroes, knights, and paladins exist. Well, black, I guess, has a few of those. And at least one lord, but this is probably best in a Boros aggro deck. There aren't any hero, knight, or paladin lords in the game, so these benefits also don't really overlap ever. Yeah, this card is kind of pulling in two different directions, but not entirely. I do think you could do cool things with this, so I'm happy to call this a pretty sweet card. The art is really good on this as well. And up next is Ruck, which is meant to be a token for Ruck Egg. It has the same mana cost on it as Ruck Egg, and I guess I give the mana cost on a token a pass because this is the first token card ever made. It was probably also fine to just play this as a card in circles that let you play with these sticker cards, that is. Yeah, there's not much else to say about it, so let's move on to Siege. An instant that costs 2 and a red. If opponent has either Castle or Border Fortress in play, all attacking creatures get +2/+0 and trample. Castle is a card from Alpha that gives defending creatures +0/+2, and Border Fortress is a land card from this set that does something similar but not as good. We'll talk about Border Fortress when we get there, but this is mostly meant to cancel out Castle, which is another card that sucks to get over when your card collection sucks. This is a neat card, I guess, but it seems spiteful more than anything. I don't think the card pool needed this, but I'm also not really bothered by it. Alright, but we're getting through these cards pretty quickly for once. So let's talk about the last red card, and that card is Tutankhamun's Mummy, a 2/1 for 1 red mana that is removed from play when it goes to the grave. So this is just a cheaper red version of Cyclopean Mummy. That's pretty funny. I don't hate the red mummy, and I guess I don't hate a red 2/1 for 1 mana. Maybe Cyclopean Mummy was overcosted. I don't know. It's a mummy. It's fine. Nothing crazy. Alright, but let's get these green cards rolling. It's always funny to me, like, how long this whole process actually takes. When really I'm just basically looking at cards and saying, is this better or worse than a Grey Ogre? Anyway, the first green card to talk about is Crocodile, a 2/1 for 2 and a green with Swamp Walk and Island Walk. And as far as Grey Ogres go, this one is strictly different. I like this card. I think it's flavorful. It's really good against someone running blue-black, and that's pretty cool. The art is pretty sweet too, if not a little confusing to look at. And you know, it's pretty easy to think about. It's good if they are in blue or black, otherwise it's not good. Simple stuff, really. Elven Ranger is a 2/2 with first strike for 2 green mana. This is just another take on Elvish Archer, but it's harder to cast and has an extra toughness. I can't decide if I think this is a little pushed or not. It is less good than White Knight or Black Knight by a little bit, but it still seems a bit pushed to me, at least for the time. Probably just because I'm comparing it to Elvish Archer, though. The art is also okay in this one. It's a little silly, but I do like it. Up next is Fairy Princess, a 2/2 lord that costs 1 and 2 green mana and gives all fairies and elves +1/+1 and forest walk. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Just another reskin of Goblin Lord and the like. I'm okay with this one too. I do think it's neat to give elves some synergy because they were painfully lacking of any sort of synergy at this point in the game's history. You couldn't really build elves. The art really feels like he cropped in a picture and sharpened it and increased the contrast, though. It doesn't look drawn to me, but I guess I could be wrong. I'm not an artist. Either way, good card, funny art, or picture, or whatever. Let's move on. Flesh to Wood is an enchant creature that costs 2 green mana, and it turns enchanted creature into a wall. This is pretty cool. It really fits the vibe of green, not really removing creatures, but dealing with it in some other way. It's probably not technically mechanically green, but it doesn't bother me. Flavorfully, I think it does a good job of making it feel green. Norin the Wary is mentioned in the flavor text of this card, which is interesting. Is Norin not Wizards of the Coast creation? I don't know. Maybe he's not, but if he is, I don't understand why you're putting him on your bootleg cards. Anyways, up next is Gypsy Moths, which would have been cancelled if this was a real Magic card. It's a summon spell without a power and toughness. Huh. So this card just doesn't work. Doesn't have a power and toughness. Fine, I'll make up my own. It's a 0/1. And it has flyers. My man should have probably taken another peek at this file, I think. Anyway, the ability is interesting, though. You can pay 1 and a black and tap this to destroy target forest. Okay, this has come up a few times, but I've neglected to mention it. But forest is spelled as forest, like Forrest Gump. Is this another attempt at avoiding copyright by misspelling forest? Or is this just a genuine misunderstanding of how to spell the word forest? I don't know, it's hard to say, but it is funny. Where was I? Oh yeah. Pay 1 and a black and tap this card to destroy a forest. Or target forest. This card would be neat if any of it actually worked properly. Land destruction isn't really a green thing now, but it could do it way back in the day with Ice Storm and Kudzu, and might even be something else I'm not thinking of. And honestly, this isn't even a super great rate. Like, it's not bad, and it is limited to forests, so I'd say it's pretty balanced as far as land destruction goes. Let's move on to Hierophant, a 2/2 lord that costs 1 and 2 green mana and gives all druids and tree folk +1/+2, which is a nice change of pace from what we've been seeing. It's a pretty sweet card. Alright, fair warning. This next card might ruffle some feathers of the color pie purists. Ionian Stones is an enchantment that costs 2 and a green. When Ionian Stones enters the battlefield, place 3 counters on it. Remove a counter from Ionian Stones to deal 1 point of damage to any target. So this is just a more difficult to remove Triskelion that can't attack but only costs half as much. Yeah, this does not feel like a green card to me. And it also kind of feels undercosted by some metrics, but maybe those other ones are just overcosted. I don't know. This seems fine to me as far as power goes, but I would not make this card green. But the last green card we have to talk about is... Oh, nope. 2 more. The next card we have to talk about is Spotted Owl, which is a 1/1 that costs 1 and a green, and you can pay a green mana and tap this to prevent the destruction of one of your forests. So this is meant to play in tandem with that canceled moth from earlier, which is sort of a fun design space, I guess. People also don't like their lands getting blown up, so this seems like it would have been popular. But now I'm pretty sure he's misspelling forest as a way to avoid copyright because it's spelled correctly in the flavor text, which is a quote from Smokey the Bear, which I guess kind of makes sense from the mechanics of the card, but if that's the quote, then why is it an owl that doesn't have flying? You could have just made this a bear. It's a weird card, but whatever. Let's talk about the last green card we have. Wyvern, a 4/4 worm with flying and first strike that costs 3 and 2 green mana. Now, I don't like too much flying on green cards, but I can live with this. Green dragons are pretty cool, or wyvern in this case. Seems like a really good card for this point in the game. It kills Sarah Angel, which is interesting, and it's a very good rate, but not brokenly good either. It is a pretty cool green card for sure. Alright, so all we have left for colored cards is the 5 multicolored cards. This is an interesting assortment of cards, so let's get into it. First up, we have Devil Boon's Demon, a 1/1 that costs a black and a red mana. So, this is obviously a reference to Boris Devil Boon, but I don't think this is meant to represent the minor demon tokens he creates, considering the casting cost is less than the activated ability to make one of the tokens, and it's also not just called minor demon. So this is just a 1/1 that costs a red and a black. Pretty hard to be mad at this card though, because it sucks. It is pretty cool though. But up next is another red and black card. This one is Eclipse, and it's a sorcery that costs 3 and a red and a black. It destroys all enchantments, and all white creatures get -1/-1 until end of turn. So this is pretty color pie breaking in that red and black have 0 ways to deal with enchantments at this point and for like the next 20 years. I guess I can respect that it's really expensive and it's forcing it into both red and black. So at least it's not like red getting this or black getting this, but I still don't like it much. The art is really sweet though. I would guess this was made in response to the Circle of Protections, so I guess I can tolerate it, but I don't much like it. So I guess let's just move on. Rosencrantz the Loud is a 2/2 summon legend that costs 2 and a red and a green. When Rosencrantz attacks, all creatures capable of blocking must block him. So this is a pretty funny card. I guess it's fairly above rate for the time because it's just lure attached to a grizzly bear. Just kind of good value when you look at it from that lens. But this card also kind of sucks. I guess it would be pretty sweet for Voltron. I'm also getting more suspicious of this art. This feels like a real picture that was superimposed onto a different background and then sharpened with it and its saturation and maybe contrast jacked way up. I don't know. It's not a problem if that's how these were made. Like, it's still art, but it's just kind of funny to me. But let's move on and talk about Tiberius. Tiberius, as we've already seen, is an elder dragon that costs 5 and Wooburg for an 8/8. This was obviously modeled after the elder dragons, and it even has the same kind of upkeep cost. You have to pay Wooburg during your upkeep or Tiberius is buried. You can pay a red mana to pump its power, or you can pay a white mana to pump its toughness, or you can pay a blue to give it flying, and curiously, you can pay a black to give it trample. And just as curiously, you can pay 3 green to regenerate Tiberius. I think I would have made it 3 black to regenerate Tiberius and given trample to green, or maybe made it cost Wooburg to regenerate and give him like first strike for black. But that's neither here nor there though. This card is pretty sweet though. Wizards wouldn't make a 5-color card until Sliver Queen in Stronghold, unless you count 1996 World Champion, but that's neither here nor there. Even by the standards of the time, this thing is kind of unplayable. Like, it costs so much mana that if you ever manage to get it out, you probably don't have enough to protect it, so it'll just get fucking swordsed or something. But it is pretty cool in a hilarious sort of way. Alright, so we're on to our last multicolored card of the day. And so far, we've covered 2 Rakdos cards, a Gruul card, and a 5-color card. So, naturally, the last one we have to talk about today is a Rakdos card, for some reason. And this card is legitimately cool. Tutankhamun is a 2/3 legend that costs 2 and a black and a red. All mummies gain first strike, desert walk, and if they inflict damage on a player, target player must receive 1 poison counter per mummy. 10 counters causes the player to lose the game. So the way that's worded, it feels like you could hit someone with a mummy and then target another opponent to get the poison counter, but that can't be how this was intended. This is pretty cool. It's another very build-around card, but it also makes poison counters an actual strategy, which is pretty cool, since up until this point in the game, there wasn't much support for them. It is kind of weird that 3 of the 5 multicolored cards are Rakdos and the other 2 are Gruul and 5-color, meaning red is represented in every single multicolored card in this set, and there are also 10 red cards. So this guy must have really liked red. I'm not judging, because I also really like red, but it's just an observation. This is the part where we would normally discuss artifacts. But before we get to artifacts, we do have to discuss the non-artifact colorless cards that appeared in this set. This isn't something that Magic did for a long time after this bootleg set, so our boy Ditzler may have been the first person to design colorless cards. However, he does have a pretty clumsy understanding of the color pie, so let's see how well he handled the colorless cards. First up, we have Adventuring Party, a 3/3 creature that costs 4 generic mana to cast, and you can pay 4 mana to have your opponent cut your library. You take the top card from the bottom pile and place it into your hand. Then reshuffle your library. This is not counted as a draw. So this must be a response to Chains of Mephistopheles? Because I can't think of anything else out there that really cares about card draw. I kind of like this card. It's 4 mana to cast and 4 mana for a card, so it's on rate for a colorless draw. The whole not counting as a draw thing is pretty funny, and it's really unique that you take from the middle. I'm not sure why you would want to take from the middle over the top, but it is fun, and if nothing else, it's a consistent way to shuffle in an era that had very little ways to do that. Yeah, this is a pretty sweet card. I have no complaints about it. Next up is Captain Sebastian, a 4/4 lord that costs 4 generic mana. You must pay 3 during your upkeep or Sebastian deals 4 damage to you and is buried. All mercenaries gain +1/+1, and if Sebastian is in play, you need not pay the other merc in upkeep phase. This is kind of fun. It's mercenary tribal, and this turns off the downsides for your other merc cards. That's kind of fun, but there aren't any mercenaries or mercs or whatever. I guess that means mercs are something he came up with. We haven't seen any mercs yet, though, and we're all the way to the colorless cards, so hopefully they're only colorless. And we have at least one card this card affects. Because if there are no mercs, this card is pretty bad, being a 4/4 for 4 with an upkeep cost of 3. The art is cool, and the idea is fun. I like the flavor of mercenaries working for anyone, so they wouldn't actually have a specific color. That's actually kind of cool. This would be pretty decent in a Tron deck. But unfortunately, our next colorless card is not a mercenary. It's Engineers, a 1/1 for 3 mana. You can tap Engineers to regenerate a wall. When you regenerate a wall in this way, put a -0/-1 counter on it. So that's pretty neat and flavorful. It kind of sucks, but it's a fun card at least. The art is charming as well. Alright, up next is Old Master, a colorless 6 mana 2/3 that lets you pay 2 mana to counter target spell. Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about this one. 6 mana is pretty rough, but like, not really. You could cast this dude with 2 mana vaults on turn 1. This card is nutso for the time. I do kind of like it though. The art is cool too. I don't know if I hate colorless countering, or if I just hate the fact that it costs 2 generic mana, when counterspell requires 2 very specific blue mana. But there's something about this card that doesn't sit right with me. That being said, part of me does like the idea of giving more stack interaction to everyone. This is definitely a divisive card, but it is interesting. Oh sweet, it's Orc Mercenaries. They are a 2/2 for 2 mana, and you need to pay 1 on upkeep or Orc Mercenaries deal 2 damage to you and are buried. When Orc Mercenaries is untapped, they gain +1/+1. This is a pretty sweet card, and it does go well with Captain Sebastian, so that's nice. It also promotes blocking over attacking, which is sort of interesting. There's not much else to say about this card, though. It might be a little above rate for Colorless, but not by much. Anyways, up next is the Colorless Interrupt. Redirection costs 5 mana, and caster may choose a new target for target sorcery, instant, or interrupt spell. This is weird to see in Colorless, but at least it costs a lot for the trouble. The idea of a colorless interrupt is super cool to me, but I'm not sure how I feel about this one. I don't think it bothers me. I don't know. It's interesting. But up next is Stockwell's Regulars. 1/2 mercenaries that cost 2 mana. You must pay 1 during upkeep, or Stockwell's Regulars do 2 points of damage to you and are buried. When untapped, Stockwell's Regulars gain +2/+1. Yeah, this is pretty much the same card, but with 1 power shifted to the ability. There isn't any other difference, except this one attacks for 1 less, unless you untap it after declaring attacks. There's not much to say about this. It's good that Merc's got adequate support in his debut set, but this is kind of just the same card twice. I guess I don't really have an issue with that. I just also don't really have anything else to say about it, so let's move on. Although I do really like the art. The Hellbird is sweet, and so is that feather in his cap. Tinker of Troubadour is a 1/1 that costs 4 mana. You can tap Tinker of Troubadour to tap or untap any artifact. Tinker may not be the target of any fast effects while he is tapped. So this is just 4 mana to take unlimited turns with Time Vault. That seems pretty good. You could also get double use out of your Icy Manipulator or whatever other brutal tap artifact you have lying around. I like this card, but it's pretty busted. The art is interesting. Yeah, not much else to say about it. It's just busted. Wall of Force is a 6 mana wall with power equal to the toughness of creature blocking Wall of Force at time of damage. And it has 4 toughness. So this wall is just gonna kill anything that slams into it. That's pretty fun, I suppose. It's interesting at least, and it does cost 6, so I don't really have a problem with this. But those are the colored cards in the set, and they are pretty interesting. Certainly a cool concept to see explored so early in the game. Old Master probably shouldn't be colorless, though. That seems a bit much. But let's talk about the artifacts. See how well those are designed. First up is Atlan's War Machine, which is an 8/8 artifact creature that costs 8 mana to cast. It has trample, and it must attack each turn or it is buried. Huh. This seems pretty good, but also not that good. It's much better than Colossus of Sardia, but that card really sucks. This, I don't know, seems too good against the type of decks you'd see in 1994 and seems kind of bad against good decks. Yeah, I don't know. It is a big old boy, though, and it might be a nice inclusion to make Tron decks not suck so much at this point, but I don't know. Next up is Ballista, a 2/3 artifact creature that costs 6 mana. It has first strike, and you can tap it to deal 2 damage to any attacking or blocking creature. This is fine, but why do the crossbow and the ballista do the same amount of damage? Seems like a flavor inconsistency to me. But I do think I'd prefer lowering how much damage crossbowmen did before raising the damage this does. Oh well. I don't have much to say about this one. The art is fine. But the next one we have to talk about is Gem of Mystery, an artifact that costs 6 mana to cast, and you can pay 4 mana and tap Gem of Mystery to take the top card of your library and put it into play. Spell is countered if it is a land or if there is no legal target. X components, X equals 1. So this is a bit of a mess. The first part that really grinds my gears is that lands are not spells, they can't be countered. There are other ways to word that, like just say if it is a land, instead put it into your graveyard. This also doesn't restrict to sorcery speed, so you could theoretically rip this during your opponent's turn and hit them with a sorcery when you aren't supposed to be able to do that, or even cast a creature, I would guess. It's not necessarily a problem in this card's design, but it is worth noting. I also don't know if you can put into play a non-permanent, but the rules wording might allow for that. And even if it doesn't, the rules were definitely a lot more nebulous at this time, so I can't really fault that too hard. This is interesting, and it has potential to mana cheat, but it's not super unfair or bullshit. It costs a lot to get to that point, and there isn't much for top deck manipulation when this set came out. Like, the only things I can really think of are Natural Selection and, I guess, sort of Sylvan Library. This card is worded badly, but really I'm just annoyed by the countering a land bit. Otherwise, this seems fine. And even a fun thing to be doing at low power pile of card meta. I don't think this is good with the best cards available, at any rate. But moving on. Next up is Gensler's Gadget, which is just the word gent slammed together with the last part of Ditzler's name. So that's pretty funny. It's a 2/2 artifact creature that costs 4 and has flying. You can also pay 2 to give it +1/+0 until end of turn. I'm assuming the end of turn part. This is fine. It's not too strong by any means, and is just a flying dragon engine, which isn't that great of a card to begin with. It's neat though, I guess. It's the Necronomicon, Book of the Dead. Costs 4 mana, and you can pay 3 black mana and tap this to bring a skeleton or zombie directly into play from your graveyard. So this is a neat concept. I haven't checked this, but I don't think Magic put colored activated abilities on artifacts for a long time after this. There might be something I'm just not thinking of, but like, I think like the spell bombs are the first thing. Anyways, I think this is an original idea, which is pretty cool. But yeah, it's a neat concept. It's not particularly good, but it's also not bad, and it does allow for some fun deck building. It's just another piece to give a specific strategy more pieces, and it's pretty flavorful. Yeah, overall, this is a decent design. I like it. Um, Up next is 30 Pieces of Silver, an artifact that costs 4 mana, and you can pay 4 and sacrifice 30 pieces of silver to gain control of target creature until that creature is destroyed. Then it reverts back to the original owner's possession. That last line is good for this card, but it does complicate a few things with cards we've talked about earlier. Does this mean that the musical chairs exchange is permanent? It doesn't say that it isn't, and this card sets the precedent to say that, so yeah, this set could definitely have used more consistency in its wording. Definitely another look or two over the list before printing, but eh. The card itself is fine. It costs 8 mana to take a thing, and yeah, it can be done in 2 turns, but then you have, significant warning that this is going to happen, and the chance to do something about it. It's more expensive and less surprising than control magic, so I guess I don't really have an issue with this. Next up is War Altar, and for the completely reasonable price of 6 mana, all of your creatures gain +1/+1. The art is pretty cool, but this card sucks pretty hard. I don't have much to say about this one, so let's just move on to Wasp of the Hive, a 1/1 flying artifact creature that costs 5, but this is actually just a token for the Hive and not really meant to be played as a card. So this idea is pretty neat. This and Ruck are the first ever tokens Magic of the Gathering had seen, at least that were professionally printed, that I've heard about. This may or may not be the most early example of somebody doing this, but it is the most early example that I have evidence of. So that's pretty cool, and the art is fun. I mentioned this earlier, but Wasp of the Hive and Ruck were pulled from the sheets and not put into the packs. And to acquire them, you had to send in 5 empty Middle Ages packs and $4, and they would send you a Ruck or a Wasp of the Hive. The packs were $2.50 each, so these were each $14 at the time, when Black Lotus was like maybe 20 bucks. I just think that's funny. I also think that practice was a pretty scummy idea, but the cards themselves were a pretty cool idea. But let's talk about the last artifact. It's a creature called Eternal Wall. It's a 0/10 that costs 7 mana and it has protection from red and protection from white. So this is rough. It just walls off some strategies while still being a wall and thus not a great card. It's another one of those designs that goes after the wrong player, in my opinion. Some people, especially those that are new or have small collections, just can't do anything about this. But more experienced players and players with larger collections will likely just get around this with flying or milling even or direct damage or have the proper removal. Actually, can this thing even be removed in the game at this time? All the wall destruction I can think of is in red. All the artifact destruction I can think of is in red or white. Terror can't hit this because it's an artifact. Oh, yeah, Crumble. Crumble exists. Okay, yeah, you can do something about this some amount of the time. I still don't really like this card, but I guess it's evocative or whatever. Anyway, that's it for the artifacts, which means the only cards I haven't shown you are the lands. And I don't know what it is about lands and early Magic, but everyone who attempted to make a land in this era either made the most busted shit you've ever seen or the stupidest garbage card you've ever seen. And our boy Ditzler managed both of these things. So let's get a good look at the 5 lands available in the Middle Ages bootleg set. First up is Border Fortress, which was referred to by the red card Siege, if you remember that. Border Fortress is a land that you can tap to give one of your blockers +0/+2. And that's it. Doesn't tap for mana. So this is obviously busted as hell because it takes a land drop, doesn't give you mana, and pumps the worst stat by 2. What a card. If you couldn't tell that was sarcasm, this card sucks. But I don't hate its existence. It's probably fine in lower power, but I really don't think the game needed more ways to keep people from attacking. Oh well. What's next? Oh boy, it's a legendary land. Castle Anthrax has a super cool name and is actually pretty decent. You can tap it to tap down target creature, and that creature cannot untap as long as Castle Anthrax is tapped. And of course, you can choose not to untap Castle Anthrax during your upkeep. This is another thing that slogs the game up, and I also don't like the idea of putting soft removal on a land in the same set that you made an enchantment that counters all land destruction, but whatever, I guess. It does have a cool name. Anyway, the next land is a legendary land called Magic Shop, and it lets you tap for a colorless. This is probably the most baffling card in this set to me. Like, why is it legendary and strictly worse than a basic? It's just a legendary version of Wastes, which is sort of interesting, and considering the colorless support, I do like the idea of a colorless land, but why is it legendary? I really don't understand. And it's such a cool concept for a land, too. A magic shop could let you, like, duplicate a sorcery or get a sorcery from your graveyard or let you search one up for, like, 5 mana or something. Like, why does it make such a whimsical setting for a land and then let it tap for a colorless and nothing else? I don't get it. But the art is cool. Okay, well, buckle up for the most cracked card in this set. Remember how I said all lands in this era were either way too good or too bad? This next one is Pyrenean Spring. This is a legendary land that you can tap to draw 2 cards. If you wish to keep the cards, you pay 4 life each. If you do not wish to keep the cards, put them into your graveyard. Holy shit, this is a weird hybrid of Bazaar of Baghdad and Sylvan Library. but it's better than both of those cards. Putting the cards into your graveyard instead of back on the library might have seemed like a downside when this card was being designed, but it certainly is not a downside. If you need to dig for something really specific, this really helps you do it. This thing is insane. 4 life per card never stopped Sylvan Library from being playable in most situations, and it won't stop this. What an absolutely cracked card. I'm almost offended how good this card is. Compared to the other lands we've seen, this is just wild. Like, who makes a couple of legendary lands, makes one of them Magic Shop, and the other one Pyrenean Spring? I don't understand. What a wild card. I could shout at the clouds about this card for an hour, but we have better things to be doing with our time, so let's talk about the last card you could have acquired from the bootleg set, Middle Ages. Rare Island is a legendary land that taps for 2 blue mana. Busted. Holy shit. What? It doesn't have a downside. It's just 2 islands stapled together. How is this okay? If this was in green, I'd still be flabbergasted, but I'd be like, yeah, green, it's the color of growth or whatever. But what the fuck is this? Game design is hard, I guess, but holy shit, it just taps for 2 blue mana. Fuck. Like and subscribe, I guess. I'll see you in the next video.